Good morning, buddy. My name's Will Schmear, and welcome back to another episode of the Lovable Survivor Podcast. Today is Tuesday, February 7th, 2023. Sorry, that was a little weird. I keep thinking I'm not going to say the date, but it is February, and this episode is being recorded in February of 2023. I think that is very important, because this is a podcast by a survivor for other survivors and family of survivors, caretakers, whatever role you might play in the equation. It is not an easy thing to be a survivor, to be a family member of a survivor, to be a caretaker for a survivor. Everybody plays a role. They are all important, and they are all very different. And that's why in this episode, we will be talking about family dynamics. You know, this is going to be different for everybody, so it'll be a lot of kind of what I learned, what I would do differently. That's generally a theme of this podcast. You know, I think there are people who are survivors that could benefit from this podcast. There are people who are going to be in a different role. They may be the primary caretaker. They may be a secondary helper. They may be an immediate family member. They might be in the individual who's had the stroke or brain injury or whatever. You might be in that person's inner circle, and you might be on the outside looking in, wanting to help. Again, everybody has a role and plays a role. And I think when it comes to family, it can be very, very tricky. It is not much different than every other part of life, you know, in any facet. So I think for me, I think there are going to be kind of three main lanes on this particular episode. Again, family dynamics is, you could have podcasts all about just family dynamics, period. And I'm sure we all have a lot of interesting stories. I know, especially around the holidays, I always see posts on social media and a whole bunch of other things where everybody's, you know, got that uncle or aunt or whatever, you know, everybody's got something to their story. There are very few people that are completely on their own. And while that may seem daunting when you find yourself alone, anybody that's had family, I love my kids, I love my wife, I love my immediate family. But yeah, I think we all eventually can find some peace with being alone. It's not initially what you think you're going to want, but as you get older in life, I think you kind of value that alone time to think and have a break and just chill. Which ironically, when I did have my stroke and was in rehab, you know, I didn't have a lot of options. There was nowhere to go or nothing to do except for doing the work. And, you know, I tried to see that time in inpatient rehab in the inpatient hospital to take the time to do that work. Very lucky to have a very supportive wife. And yeah, I mean, I guess we can let's jump into the first phase. So as a stroke survivor, if you are a stroke survivor or a brain injury survivor, or you've survived any major medical event and you are the primary patient listening to this podcast, there are, you know, I think I talked about it in the last episode, obviously, the overwhelm. There is a lot of information coming at you. There are lots of things you may want to do, may need help doing. You know, I think looking back, I don't think I handled things too poorly, but I had, I don't want to say I did it right, but I think I had a good mindset. I knew a couple of things. I knew pretty quickly there were limitations. Like I couldn't get out of the bed, so I needed to ask for help. You know, the first week before I got to the rehab hospital, I was in the what I call the regular hospital, you're pretty confined to the bed as a stroke patient who could not walk and was enormous. There were safety issues, there were fall risks. So yeah, there was very little getting out of the bed for me, which was really interesting for somebody who doesn't like sitting down. We've had couches as a family. Every house I think has a couch, right? But I've never been one to be sitting on the couch. I'm more of a stander upper. Give me a chair, give me a thing. I don't want to get into a couch. That might be a 6'8" big guy thing where if I get in the couch, I'm not going to get out of the couch. That could be a stroke thing. I don't know what it is exactly, but yeah, I'm not what you call a couch sitter. I don't know why. That's just not my thing. So yeah, it was really hard for me initially. And going back, getting on track here with family, I recognized. So my situation is a little unique. When I had my stroke in December of 2019, I was in the hospital. My family was coming in town for Christmas anyway, because we had just moved to Florida. My two sisters and my brother-in-law were all coming to visit. So the timing kind of worked out really well. Kind of. In 2018, I lost my parents to a tragic hiking accident. You can Google my name. You can Google my parents' names. Yeah, so we had just gone through that the previous year. So it was about 18 months later that I had my stroke, not long after I moved to Florida. So I had family coming in town for the holidays. Not the holidays anybody was expecting, that's for sure. But because my sisters and I and my brother-in-law and my immediate family, my wife and 3 kids, we had all just kind of a year and a half ago dealt with the loss of my parents. So we knew how to bond and work together quickly to figure out a plan. It was very clear I was not going to do a lot of it. Both of my sisters are younger. So my middle sister, I guess, the middle child of my parents, the older of the 2 sisters, sort of took the main reins, which she always has. And she's very good at that. We're all pretty good at being problem solvers and figuring out problems to solutions. So we had a little bit ahead of time. We had practice working together as kind of a team. And we were able to figure out the immediate very quickly. So we were able to work together to delegate. My brother-in-law helped with a lot of phone calls and stuff. On the financial end, he also helped my wife and kids. Yeah, I mean, you just kind of bind together and you find your team, which I already had pretty well established at that time. Things are different now, but that's kind of where I'll go next. Yeah. So I had my inner circle, which was my 2 sisters, my wife, my brother-in-law, very tight. And they helped me with my family. My wife helped a lot. That part was pretty well handled. My sisters were very instrumental and I owe them a debt of gratitude. And I still, to this day, am very thankful. And I think they know that if they need anything, I would certainly do the same the best way I can now, which is usually for me to get out of the way. But yeah, I mean, I think we just kind of all know how to do that as a family. So very lucky in that regard. And they know that the outer family, not the inner circle, is not my forte. That is not the area that I excel in nor want to. I'm happy to talk to people, but yeah, I mean, I think the initial clear thing was that I was safe and stable. I obviously was messed up from the stroke and the subsequent MS diagnosis 2 months later, but they were helping navigate things and they were sort of shielding me from having to deal with any outside people. That's not to say I didn't, and I'm happy to, but yeah, I think there is, as the survivor, there are some things that are going to fall on your plate, and I think just recognizing that you're going to make mistakes as an individual with family, owning those mistakes, just doing the best you can is good enough. People are going to respect boundaries. Some people are not. It's not any different than life. I think you just have to, you don't have to do anything, but I think you need to make sure you're sort of asking and keeping yourself in check. And if you're not good at that, like I can tend to be, I get very neurotic sometimes. I get overwhelmed, and again, with stroke, so many physical limitations initially. You have to get comfortable asking for help. Thankfully, I'm pretty good at delegating. So, we developed a system. Nothing's perfect. I think getting everybody on the same page where it's like, it's hard for everybody. You as a survivor, obviously it's going to be a hard, long, difficult road. Caretaker, really hard on them. Family, really hard on them. It's hard on everybody. So I think once everybody's clear that this is not easy for anybody in any role, and that everybody is working with good intentions, nobody's out to hurt anybody, nobody's out to, do the wrong thing. There are no playbooks for this. It's really, I don't, you can compare it to a lot of things, but it's kind of like a when disaster strikes, how do you figure it out? And you just do the best you can. I mean, I know that's really cliche, really generic, but your situation is going to be different than everybody else's. So yes, I want you to listen to this podcast, but I want you to take what I say and translate it to things that work for you and your family. I think everybody on the inside team just needs reminders that everybody's doing the best they can. When you go talk to doctors and nurses, be polite, be courteous. They are, I love my doctors and nurses and any staff member at the inpatient hospital here in Jacksonville that I worked with. I mean, I was eternally grateful. The job isn't pretty, and there are lots of people in the inpatient hospital that are also going through things. And so a nurse or a CNA or a doctor might have just walked out of another room where just a weird thing happened and emotions are high. So, I always try to keep it light and I wanted to be honest when they ask questions, but I also like to make jokes and make people smile and make people laugh because it's a really hard thing. And, I say it all the time, but improv is really one of the best things I ever did because it just allowed me to kind of adapt in situations. And, when you find yourself having a stroke at 37, which was, I was 37, that was really young. But if you find yourself in this spot at any age, you're not trying to make light of the situation, but you quickly realize you're presented with very unexpected problem hitting you square in the mouth, right in the face, so to speak. It is nothing short of a gut punch, and everybody's going to handle that differently, but being emotional and irrational is going to happen, and it's okay. Just be mindful. And I think I think we're all trying to do that anyways at any point. If you are the caretaker, if you are family, and you're not the one who's actually had the actual event, I'm not excusing the survivor or the person who's had the event, but just know it's going to be difficult for that individual as well. And there are lots of emotions for everybody. And again, everybody plays a very critical role, but I think it can be really jarring initially once the individual, like myself, once I kind of realized like I am not going to be better in 2 or 3 days. Like once that starts to sink in, because there's a little bit of a delay, or I recall there being a delay of like, oh man, this is real. This is like, there is no pill that I'm going to be able to take to snap out of this. This is not a take 2 Advil or 2 Tylenol and sleep it off, or wake up tomorrow and feel better. This is not a cold. This is major. And although I didn't want to hear it at the time from some doctors who are a little, I think, abrupt, they were spot on. I mean, I wish I had a wake up call earlier. I wish I was able to stop it in some way. Unfortunately, I can't go back in time. And I think that's important too for the individual and for the family, is that this is going to be a long, hard road. It is going to take time. Some take less than others. Some, one of the things that I often struggle with, and honestly struggled with until about a year ago, was that I just kept thinking, okay, well, I'll be that person that wakes up one day and has, everything's fine. That remains yet to be true, but, and never say never, but it is less of a thought now than it was in the early days. Because I think in the early days, you kind of just don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And it's confusing too, because everybody and family, you're all trying to work together and do this work and get into a good rehab facility, and so many things really, and that's why this is still kind of the early days, and kind of part of that early overwhelm is that with an event like this, it is a little less straightforward than other things in life. Example, let's say you play sports. Maybe you're in high school, maybe when you were a kid, you broke your leg or an arm, and you go to the doctor, and it's about, 6 to 8 weeks, you'll be in the cast. And, that just takes a matter of 6 to 8 weeks. And generally you follow that up with a little bit of physical therapy, in a matter of time, maybe not 6 to 8 weeks, but, in a couple of months, you're back to normal. And that is what I call sort of a straightforward injury. When you've gone through a stroke, or maybe a heart attack, cancer, anything that is a kind of what I consider a significant life event, TBI, there are people who get injured in work or on the job. If you find yourself in an inpatient rehab hospital, that means you've had a significant life event. And so the timetable changes from 6 to 8 weeks to TBD, which can be really, really tough, again, for the individual, for the caretaker, for the family, because it's not as straightforward as logging 1,000 hours, 10,000 hours, logging 6 weeks, 8 weeks, logging 6 months, logging a year. It is very difficult. And depending on the severity of the stroke, now that caveat there, the classification of severity varies, I think. And I always make this joke, is that I apparently did not have what is classified as a major medical stroke, but it majorly fucked up my life. So I would call that major, but technically speaking, in the world of medicine, I guess it's not a major stroke. But that's a little blurry. So the labeling doesn't really matter, because I think, again, with the brain, as much as we know, I mean, we put men on the moon, men and women in space, like whatever, like We have done a lot of things in this world, and it is surprising how few things have not evolved. And I think that's kind of the impotence of this podcast and hopefully YouTube channel and just kind of the community that I'm building behind with survivor science is like there's more to learn. And again, going back to this work, you put in the work, you start doing the work with yourself, with your family to rehab. This is going to be longer than you think. And I think anything short of longer than you think is just take the win. But again, it can be overwhelming. It can certainly be a lot. And I think one of the struggles is that you don't know, you just keep doing the work and showing up in rehab. If you are able to get to an inpatient, or even if you're doing home health care, you have to get those reps in, because particularly when you had a stroke, your brain is rewiring itself. Yeah, your brain is rewiring itself, and it takes time to heal, So I think that is also important, is these brain injuries. Again, if you're the individual survivor, it's going to take time just to flat out heal. You're going to have to rest, sleep. You're going to have to listen to doctors initially, because they are working to get you stable and healthy. I don't care if you don't like the food, eat the food, pay attention. Like the doctors in the hospital are absolutely on your side. And if you don't like things, just know that there is a reason that they're telling you to do what to do. Yeah, there is a reason the doctors are telling you to do the things they're telling you to do. The staff, this podcast is really, it's for everybody. It's for the survivors, the caretakers, the family. We are going back these early episodes kind of to the early days, things I wish I knew sooner, but eventually you may take a different direction. And that's because eventually you probably will leave the hospital. You will probably leave inpatient rehab if you're lucky enough to get to a facility, but early on, I would say it's pretty important to listen to people who work in these facilities, because they've seen a lot of things. And although certain things may not feel like they work for you specifically, that's okay. Have those conversations, but have them in a kind and important way. If you're a family member, just remember to be, courteous and professional and with staff and doctors, because they really are trying to help people. I mean, that is very clear, but sometimes in the moment it could feel very unclear, or it could feel like they are not giving you answers that you want. And, I think that is fair for both sides. I think, unfortunately, at least here in the States, I think there is some hesitation by doctors to tell you either the hard truth, or some tell you the hard truth. Sometimes you don't want to hear the hard truth. So it can be it's tricky, just like anything else in life, just like work, whether you work for somebody else or work for yourself. These are difficult conversations, but I think if you just remind yourself to be kind to yourself, to others, especially staff, medical professionals, they know that this is going to be tough. They have seen it. They may give you, again, information that seems irrelevant at the time, and it may be at that time irrelevant, but it's not something you should brush off completely or ignore. It may be just something you should write down and save for later, because things are constantly changing, constantly evolving, and especially in the early days. Again, it's a ton of overwhelm, lots of information coming your way, lots of, there's a good chance if you've had a stroke and you're in the hospital, or you had some kind of brain injury, there are many pieces to the puzzle. So it's not only you and finding yourself either in the hospital as the individual survivor or a family member or a caretaker or all those things. There's, the staff. It's just so many pieces to the puzzle. So again, I think it's just my best advice is to be cognizant, to be kind, to recognize that everybody on the inside is really working in your best interest. There might be times where there are hiccups and it feels like things are against you. I assure you that is not the case. Just like family dealing with a loved one going through a very difficult thing here, the staff, particularly doctors and nurses, think about it. They're seeing tons of patients who have just gone through a similar thing. So they're kind of regurgitating information. They might feel like they're telling everybody the same thing, but at the same time, everybody in a hospital setting or inpatient rehab is in a similar spot. It is the early days, and generally speaking, the information they are giving you is to get you to a stable place. Longer term, that's going to change, but initially, they're trying to help you get better as quickly as possible. Because we all know, at least here in the United States, that healthcare is healthcare, and any help you get is going to be, something you should take advantage of, and you don't necessarily get a ton of time. So the quicker you get to work, so to speak, the better your chances. That could be tough to hear. But yeah, I think, again, remember, nobody's intentionally making mistakes. Nobody is intentionally trying to hinder what is going to be a long process. I think everybody is on the same page. And try to remember that every time you do get into an argument and emotions get heightened and conversations happen, and they are tough conversations, it's that everybody is trying to work to the best interest. As a survivor, recognize too that your caretaker is trying to do the best they can. Whether in that case, that was kind of my wife, but my sisters as well. And it was a team effort. And everybody played a little bit of a different role. And I don't know if I handled it perfectly, but I think I did a decent job. And I probably apologized too much, but I'd rather apologize. And I kept saying over and over, if I'm doing this wrong, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to figure it out. And I think in hindsight, I sort of knew everybody well enough to know what their skills were, but I don't know if I got it right every time. And, I will tell you, it over time, it gets a little trickier. But certainly in the beginning, I think everybody knows that. Just remind everybody that you're all on the same page. You're all working towards the same goals, and tell your loved ones you appreciate them, even if you get into an argument that day. Just know that everybody is trying to do the best for everybody. And again, as the survivor, recognize that the people who are not in your spot are also taking time off work, putting in effort to try to help you rebuild initially. Please, I know emotions are heightened and sometimes you argue, but please remember the people that love you are also making an effort. It feels very different at the time, but go out of your way to be appreciative and say thank you. And I think those are kind of my top things. I'm sure I made a ton of mistakes, and I'm sure there are other things I could add to this. And I'm sure we'll talk about family and dynamics many more times on this show. And I think, in a couple episodes, we'll do kind of that next phase, because I think that's where things also get tricky, because sometimes people are very good at banding together initially, but then, what happens later down the road on how do you handle that? It's none of it's easy. None of it's the same, but there are things I think we can all share and learn. and teach each other and remind each other of. And when it comes to all this stuff, I think you just remember, I know it sounds corny as hell, but like when you're going through this at any stage, and it may not be a stroke, but it might be something similar, and it might be a different age, it might be a different category. Really, when it comes down to this, remember that everybody is trying to work in their best interest to help everybody and to just be supportive and be kind, and also to be patient. Because I think, sometimes we get into these things and we react and we help, but then everybody has a bad day, somebody loses, and